Okay.
Yes, you can go ahead.
Okay, great. Thanks. So I'm also going to turn my camera off. But welcome everyone. Thank you so much for coming to hear about providing multilingual, multicultural health information. I'm so delighted to be here. And again, my name is Benny Finch, and I'm one of the education and outreach coordinators from Region 7 of the network of the National Library of Medicine. And first, just in case we have people who've never heard of us who aren't familiar with the NNLM, I want to give a quick overview of who we are and what we do. The network of the National Library of Medicine, or NNLM, serves as an outreach and engagement arm for the National Library of Medicine, and we provide trainings, funding opportunities, and more to a wide variety of member organizations to help support our mission of advancing the progress of medicine and improving the public health. For more information about NNLM, please visit nnlm.gov. And I just want to point out on this map that there are 7 regional medical libraries that support the work of the NNLM, and we are part of Region 7. So we include Connecticut, Maine, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, New York, Rhode Island, and Vermont. And you're welcome to check out our Region 7 webpage. And I'm not able to see chat, but Joy, if you're willing to watch the chat for me, I would appreciate that. So these are our learning objectives for the next hour. We'll start with some background information and describe the current landscape of immigrants, including refugees and asylees in the United States. And we'll also review some key concepts related to cultural competence and humility and how they influence our workplace environments. And then we'll finish, which is the main portion, is live demonstrations of some websites that offer free, reliable health information in multiple languages. Before we start, I'd like to just get you thinking about our topic, and I'm curious to know your experience with sharing information in languages other than English. So I just wanted to ask, what languages do people in your community seek information? Do you ever get requests for information in languages other than English? And if so, where do you look for multilingual health information? So if you would be willing to put your thoughts in the chat, that would be great. And I can just share a little bit about my experience of working with information in multiple languages. Primarily, the language I am looking for is Spanish. There are a lot of people who speak Spanish in my community. So often, if I'm creating a resource or looking at things, I'm looking to find documents in both English and Spanish to have things to share. Um, did anyone add anything to the chat, Joy?
No, but I can say that just anecdotally, we have people coming. We have Afghan refugees, and they speak
Mhm.
couple different languages, but that's kind of a new situation for Vermont. Um, there's people who are from different parts of Africa that have various languages as well, particularly in the Chittenden County where Burlington and Winooski are.
Okay.
And then I think we also hear from people looking for French and Spanish as well.
Okay, great. Thank you. That helps. So when we look at resources today, I'll look for some of those too. Um, Great, thank you. So the first section that we'll cover gives some background information about immigrants and then some specific information about refugees and asylees and examines where people are coming from before arriving in the United States. This presentation is a national presentation that we offer, and it's meant to be a broad overview to provide some context before jumping into the multilingual and multicultural health information resources. Much of the data that I'll provide today is at the national level, but I will also share some specific to the state of Vermont. So, immigrant is a broad term for individuals that don't have U.S. citizenship at birth, and immigrant is often used interchangeably with the term foreign born. And I will interchange today. So it's important to note that this includes refugees and asylees, as well as other foreign-born populations, such as green card holders and naturalized citizens. And again, when I use the term today, I'm referring to any person living in a country other than that of his or her birth, even if that person has lived most of their life in the country, taken the citizenship of the destination country, served in its military, married a citizen, or has another status. And personally, when I think of immigrants, I am bringing in my own experience, but I've lived in a college town for the last 25 years. So I've had many friends who have immigrated to the United States for school and who are temporary visa holders and may return to their home countries. I also have colleagues and friends who have immigrated to the United States from around the world for work and for school. And I also think of many in my community who are asylum seekers, asylees, and refugees. Um, we'll touch on the definitions of refugees and asylees in a bit, but first let's take a little deeper look at immigrants on a broad scale in the United States. So there are about 45.3 million immigrants in the United States as of 2021, which represents 13.6% of the overall population. Foreign-born population growth fluctuates over time. The foreign-born population in the United States had been steadily growing since the 1970s. Since 2010, the number of foreign-born population in the US increased about, well, between, and this is a pretty big range, but between 400,000 and 1 million people per year. Since 2017, those increases have gone down to about 200,000 per year, and the percentage of the US population that's foreign born has plateaued over the last decade. So, what countries of origin are most represented for immigrants in the United States? This data is not specific to new arrivals, but is for all immigrants living in the United States at a given moment in time. And this chart shows the top 10 countries of origin for immigrants in the US in 2019. And I did look at the data for 2021, and that the top 10 countries are the same. The numbers on the left represent percentages, and the furthest column on the left is labeled other, and that's 43%. So we can say that over half of all immigrants or foreign born individuals living in the United States have immigrated from the 10 countries listed on the chart. So that second bar from the right represents Mexico, which is a bit of an outlier. Mexico is the country of origin for about 24% of all immigrants living in the US, and that's a decline from 30% in 2000. And Mexico is no longer the top origin country for new immigrants. So I think these numbers will continue to shift, but the remaining 9 countries are relatively equal, sitting between 2% for Korea and Guatemala and 6% for India and China. And one thing to note is of these 10 countries is that from a geographic standpoint, they're either Asia, Central America, or the Caribbean. And this is something to keep in mind as we begin to look at where refugees and asylees are coming from and the variation of the geographic location between of countries between these populations. So recall that refugees fall under that broad definition of immigrant, but people must fit certain criteria to fall under the definition of a refugee. The first being that these are individuals who are unable or unwilling to return to their country due to fear of persecution. This might be because of things like race, ethnicity, religion, ongoing conflict, or other concerns. But essentially, these are individuals who have fled their home country due to fear for their safety or their lives. The second piece that characterizes refugee status is that it's appointed abroad, so meaning outside of the United States. So individuals fleeing their home country often would end up in a refugee camp, and it's once they're in the refugee camps that they start the application process for the United States refugee status. I won't get into detailed specifics for that, um, but it is a rigorous process. In general, it involves security checks, State Department interviews, biometric security checks, and health screenings. And if an individual's application is approved, they're then granted the status of refugee and allowed to come legally to the United States. So since 1980, which was the first year of the Refugee Act, more than 3.1 million refugees have been accepted into the United States. I briefly talked about the refugee application process on the last slide, but I also want to mention the process for allowing refugees into the United States. So each year, in consultation with Congress, the president sets a refugee admission ceiling. So that's the highest number of refugees allowed in the country for a given year. And this number is further broken down with a designated number of allowable admissions by region or country, or by reason for seeking refugee status. So that could be based on national security interests, the severity of conflicts abroad, and it can be adjusted in the case of, of an unforeseen emergency. I've noted on the slide that for fiscal year 2021, the ceiling was initially set at 15,000, meaning the US would accept no more than 15,000 refugees, and that is the lowest ceiling level set since the program began in 1980. President Biden adjusted this number in April of 2021 based on a determination that new allocations were necessary to respond to the unforeseen emergency refugee situation. And just of note, the 2023 ceiling is currently set at 125,000. But what's also important to note is that the ceiling level doesn't mean that's how many refugees will be accepted into the country. So for example, between 2002 and 2008, the ceiling fluctuated between 70 and 80,000, while the actual number of refugees admitted ranged from 27,000 to 60,000. So these gaps have also become present again, and we'll see that in the next slide. So in fiscal year 2018, the refugee ceiling was set at 45,000, but the actual number admitted was less than 23,000. This line diagram shows two lines. The top line is that refugee ceiling, so the most refugees that could be accepted that year, and the lower line indicates the actual number of refugees admitted. In fiscal year 2021, just over 11,400 individuals arrived in the US as refugees, the fewest since the establishment of the Refugee Admissions Program. In fiscal year 2022, 25,465 refugees were resettled. And so far in fiscal year 2023, which actually includes October, November, and December of 2022, 6,750 refugees have been resettled. When we look at where refugees have come from in 2021, we can see a difference compared to the broader context of immigration. For example, we see countries from Africa and the Middle East, which had no representation on that top 10 list for all immigrants. Some of the countries most represented were the Democratic Republic of Congo, Syria, Afghanistan, Ukraine, and Myanmar, which is listed here as Burma. We need a new slide, but the data is just in for fiscal year 2022, and the top three countries of origin for refugee populations are Democratic Republic of Congo, Syria, and Burma. It's also important to note that where refugees are coming from fluctuates and changes from year to year. So looking at the countries on this chart, you can see that many of them are countries that are facing civil wars and other conflicts, resulting in the displacement of many people who often end up in refugee camps and would apply for that refugee status. Some people have been forcibly displaced from their homes, others by famine, discrimination, gang violence, or other reasons. For this presentation, we're focusing on refugee arrivals in the United States, but we recognize that there's global displacement within countries and with refugees fleeing their country of origin. So I wanted to take a look at resources in Vermont, and I found USCRI, which is the United States Committee for Refugees and Immigrants. According to their website, refugees have primarily come from Afghanistan, for Vermont, have primarily come from Afghanistan, Bhutan, Bosnia, Burma, Burundi, Congo, Brazzaville, Democratic Republic of Congo, Iraq, Kosovo, Sudan, Somalia, Syria, and Vietnam. And the next group we'll discuss today are asylees or asylum seekers. So this group is similar to refugees in that they're unable or unwilling to return to their country due to fear of persecution. But the main difference is that asylum seekers apply for their status once they're already in the US, or at least have arrived at one of the country's borders or ports of entry. So remember, refugees go through that entire application process and gain their status abroad. The process for receiving asylee status is very complicated. It has multiple steps and can involve multiple government offices. This includes background and security checks, as well as an interview for the initial application process. An individual generally must apply for asylum within 1 year of their most recent arrival in the United States. And if you're interested in learning more about that process, I'm happy to share some references after the presentation. This chart shows the percentage of granted asylum applications in the US by country of origin in 2020. Individuals from China, Venezuela, and El Salvador accounted for 35% of those granted asylum. status in 2020, and asylees from 3 Central American countries, which are El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala, combined represented more than 16% of all granted asylum applications in 2020, compared to just 4% in 2010. Also of note, due to the political situation in Venezuela, the percentage of asylees jumped from 2% in 2017 to 23.5% in 2018 and still remained high at 13% in 2020. This data is pulled from the US Census and migrationpolicy.org, and it reflects data from 2019 and 2020. The population of Vermont is 645,570, and the foreign-born population of Vermont is just under 30,000, making up 4.7% of the population. I've included the breakdown by naturalized citizens and non-citizens, just if you're interested. And I did want to mention that 5.6% of the population of Vermont indicate speaking a language other than English at home. I'd forgive the tiny writing, but I just wanted to show you what this looks like on the website. So this slide shows the top 10 immigration populations by state. I've selected Vermont on the map from migrationpolicy.org. This data is a little older and shows, but it does show that 4% of the population being foreign born. This bar chart below that pie, so there's the pie chart and shows the 4%. This bar chart below shows that the vast majority have come from Canada, followed by European countries. And again, this data is a little dated, but in 2010, the top languages spoken at home other than English were French, Spanish, and German. So why is all this important? Well, as we've discussed, people may have had years to plan on coming to the US as a student, for work, or to join family, or they may have fled their home with little preparation. We know that people arrive in the United States in many different ways, from many different places and with a variety of native languages, and these shift over time. So even though we might see the number of refugees admitted each year changing, the number of asylum applications continues to rise. Um, and The other piece is that our communities, our neighborhoods, and our workplaces are becoming more diverse. The following is from a document called Engaging Multilingual Communities and English Language Learners in United States Libraries, and it's from the ALA. And here's the quote. The United States is one of the most culturally, economically, climatically, racially, linguistically, ethnically, and religiously diverse countries in the world, end quote. Individuals who have recently arrived may be looking for information and help as they adjust to a new country, culture, and language. And we must also consider how we interact with, communicate with, and work with individuals with cultures, backgrounds, and points of view that are different from our own. So this leads us nicely into our second section, which is utilizing the concepts of cultural competence and humility to help us in our daily lives and when working with individuals whose background and cultures may be different from our own. Here's another quote by Stephen Covey. Um, the deepest hunger of the body is air. The deepest human need is to be understood, is the need to be understood. So this is where cultural competence comes in. Cultural competence is the ability to understand and interact effectively with people from other cultures. To have multicultural competence, you need a basic understanding of your own culture. It's difficult to understand another's culture if you aren't familiar with your own. You need a willingness to learn about cultural practices and worldview of others, and a positive attitude towards cultural differences and a readiness to accept and respect those differences. So again, why is cultural competence important? Well, as we discussed, we're living in an increasingly diverse and beautiful world and communities with people with diverse racial or ethnic backgrounds, including refugees, migrants, and immigrants. And this offers the opportunity to build valuable, diverse relationships. Cultural competence is important because without it, our opportunity to build these relationships could be limited. Instead, we'll coexist with people we don't understand, thereby creating a higher risk for misunderstandings, hurt feelings, and bias. And these are things that can all be avoided. So over the next few slides, I'll briefly introduce the 5 principles of cultural competence and discuss some of the critiques of using cultural competence and present the concepts and pillars of cultural humility and how these principles can be applied in libraries. So the first principle is valuing diversity, which recognizes differences between and within cultures and people. So it also acknowledges differences as a valued asset. So for example, you may have a coworker or a neighbor who grew up in the United States, but has parents who immigrated from a country outside the US. And they may have different points of view or celebrate different holidays based on their country of origin. By getting to know them better, learning about their customs, and understanding the way they experience the world can be a rewarding and enriching experience because it provides us with the opportunity to reflect on our own beliefs, values, and customs, as well as those of others from backgrounds that are different to our own. Um, it also involves accepting and respecting that there isn't a common culture shared between members of a racial, linguistic, or religious group, and that creates a more accepting environment that values everyone's diversity, and this helps to break down stereotypes. Second is conducting a cultural assessment, and this principle challenges us to understand how we currently approach work in a multicultural environment. So, this means looking at our attitudes and practices. Am I considering multiple cultures when I create promotional and marketing materials? Do the services that I offer meet the needs of my community, which could change over the years in terms of demographics? And in the context of healthcare, so this presentation is often shared with healthcare providers as well, but in the context of healthcare, nurses who assess their patients' cultural beliefs, values, and practices are better able to individualize care and achieve positive outcomes. Um, and for libraries, in terms of resources, a cultural assessment can help provide a baseline in terms of where you are and identify certain gaps or areas where improvements might be made to meet the needs of immigrant communities. The third principle is understanding the dynamics of difference, and this is really about cross cultural interactions and how these might be influenced by learned expectations. So, this might include bias and implicit bias, historic mistrust, stereotypes that have been learned over years or generations, or other factors that can inhibit communication through misinterpretation or misjudgment. When two people from different cultures interact, both will bring culturally prescribed patterns of communication and problem solving skills to the situation, and these may conflict. Without the understanding of cross cultural dynamics, misinterpretations and misjudgments can occur. Fourth is institutionalizing cultural knowledge. So, this principle is really a follow up to that cultural assessment and reflection on the dynamics of difference. So, it asks the question, are you able to take what you learned from your assessment and bring that into your daily work, your interactions, and the culture of an organization to make it a fair and welcoming environment for all? And the final principle is adapting to diversity. So, this principle really encompasses the previous four with an emphasis that each individual's culture is always changing and that we need to continually adapt in order to meet the needs of our communities. And even though cultural competence is frequently used within organizations, it's not without some controversy. Some argue that cultural competence puts too much of a focus on the other, meaning it's designed to make one more comfortable with others, as opposed to becoming more um, self-aware about their own potential biases and power differentials. So there's also a critique that cultural competence uses culture as a proxy for everyone who's not white. So in other words, it places a strong emphasis on race and ethnicity as opposed to other aspects of culture, such as socioeconomic status, gender, age, or sexual orientation, which in turn ignores the impact these social aspects play in health disparities and social inequities. And finally, there's a concern that cultural competence emphasizes a finite learning model, so one in which a dominant group reaches a plateau, if you will, in becoming competent in another culture. So that ideology can be harmful as it can lead to stereotypes. And as we know, culture is always evolving. So at no point will you ever reach the end of the learning process. And to that end, there is now a growing movement to support cultural competence by incorporating aspects of cultural humility. So that's a term you might have heard. Um, but if not, you might be asking, what is the difference? Cultural humility is a lifelong process of self reflection and self critique. And this begins with the individual not only learning about another's culture, but starts with an examination of one's own beliefs and cultural identities. The model was originally developed as a tool in medical education to prepare physicians to work with the increasingly diverse populations in the United States. But this model is useful for all people as our world becomes more diverse. On a theoretical framework, cultural humility follows three principles or pillars. These are lifelong learning and critical self-reflection. And that means that we're flexible enough to assess that each individual has their own culture and their own cultural dimensions. And we are humble enough to say we don't know when we don't know. So doing this can help individuals let go of stereotypes or biases. The second is recognize and challenge power imbalances. So this principle outlines inequities, not just in terms of the control healthcare providers have over patients, but it also the social inequities that create disparities in health among populations. And the third is institutional accountability. And this is emphasizing that cultural humility doesn't exist just at an individual level, but these same principles and ideas should be reflected and emphasized at an institutional level as well. You can see some overlap or at least some areas where cultural humility intersects with competency. For example, self-reflection and being humble can assist with understanding the dynamics of difference, and institutional accountability aligns with institutionalizing cultural knowledge. It's important to recognize the value of cultural humility and how it can support you and your organization in working and interacting with individuals who have backgrounds, cultures, and points of view that are different from your own. Zan Goodman has developed some important work around how the three pillars of cultural humility can be applied in libraries. She describes these as a commitment to lifelong learning, a willingness to acknowledge and dismantle power differentials, and a commitment to connecting to the community you support. Zan Goodman states, cultural humility is a tool we can use in our libraries to help us better support our patrons and to improve communication with our colleagues. Remember to be patient with yourself. Cultural humility is not an endpoint, but rather a continual process of questioning, learning, and acting. So now we'll transition to the real reason you're probably here, which is to learn about resources to support health information access. So we are going to head there now. One of the ways we can support cultural humility is through information access. There are many free resources that provide access to health information in multiple languages, as well as information that can help us learn about the countries, health conditions, and experience of refugees and asylees. I typically focus on national resources, so we'll do those first, but I've also found a few Vermont-specific resources that I want to share during the presentation. And just to start, I'll share, we're going to take a tour of 4 different websites that offer a variety of health information in numerous languages. Those are Medline Plus, the CDC Center for Disease Control and Prevention, the Office of Minority Health, and Ethnomed. And then again, we'll go over these in the demonstration, but I am including the links here, and I'll get a copy of the PowerPoint and some references to you after the presentation. But the Vermont Department of Libraries has a resource page for new Americans with a variety of helpful tools. The Vermont Department of Health has produced a number of health information, print, and audio video resources in English plus other languages spoken in Vermont about preventing illness, healthy homes, and preparing for extreme weather events. So we'll take a look at those as well. And there's also a resource, I'm sorry, I just wanted to mention that some of the languages that we'll see are Arabic, Burmese, Chinese, French, Kirundi, Nepali, Somali, Spanish, Vietnamese, Swahili, Serbo-Croatian, and Russian. And there's also some links to videos from a project called the Vermont Language Justice Project. I don't really know a lot about them, but we'll look at their resources as well. And typically this would be my goodbye slide, but I'm just going to say thank you for now and give you my information, and I'll put this back up at the end. But for now, I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to open up my web browser so I can demo the websites. Is there anything in the chat, Joy, that I should address at this point?
No, we're
Okay.
good in the chat.
Okay, so I hope to have some time. There should be time at the end if people have questions, or if you need me to slow down while I'm going through the resources, just let me know, please. But I'm hoping to share. Okay, so are you seeing my web page that says Medline Plus?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so uh, Some of you are probably familiar with Medline Plus, but it may have some features that you're not familiar with. And in case you're not familiar with them, um, Medline Plus is the consumer health website from the National Library of Medicine. It holds 1,000+ topic pages on diseases and health conditions. There's information on drugs and supplements, over 150 articles on medical tests, more than 2,800 pages about genetics, genetic conditions, and the gene or chromosomes related to those conditions. And Medline Plus has information available on a variety of topics in many different languages and available in different formats. So first, I want to just point out that Medline Plus, the website, is available in Spanish as well as English, and you can easily toggle back and forth between those two uh, sites. I do want to mention that the site has been directly translated as opposed to using something like Google Translate. So this has been directly translated into Spanish. I'm going to go back to the English page. Um, most of the materials are written at about a 6th grade reading level, and we're going to take a look. I'm just going to look at arthritis. So if we type a search into the search box on Medline Plus, you're going to get a page that looks something like this. And there are 1,700 articles within Medline Plus that are at least in some way related to arthritis. You can see on the left that there are ways to filter by the type of information that you're looking for. And as you become more familiar with the site, you'll have a better sense of what you might be looking for. But anytime you see this card, and not every page will have this, but if there is a specific health topic on that page, you'll see this thing that looks like an index card. And that means it's a health topic page. So we're going to check this out first. And um, so this at the top, the first thing you'll notice is that there's a table of contents. So this is going to give you an idea of what you're going to find on this page. There's also typically a summary at the top. But I also want to draw your attention to the things on the right side of the page. So there's a medical encyclopedia that is part of Medline Plus. And these are terms that you might come across while reading this article on arthritis. So if you are not familiar with one of these terms, you can hop over to the medical encyclopedia and see what it is and get some more information. There's also information on related health topics. There's also the National Institutes of Health. So this box is going to show you the National Institute of Health that's particularly interested in this health topic. So for this, it's the National Institute of Arthritis and Musculoskeletal and Skin Diseases. And there's a box for other languages. So we can go to this health information in languages other than English. And for arthritis, there are articles that have something to do with arthritis in 10 different languages. And then you can scroll down and see what languages are available for that article. And I'm going to go back to our main, because I just want to go over a few more things on this health topic page in case you're not familiar with the Medline Plus resource. There are outside links to, there are materials to outside materials from the other National Institutes of Health and other organizations that have been vetted by the National Library of Medicine. So that's an important piece here, is that all of these resources have been vetted by the National Library of Medicine. And one thing that's helpful is if the article is available in Spanish, it's going to say that right here on this page. So if we're looking at arthritis, so there's an article from the Mayo Foundation that is available in both English and Spanish. Anytime you see this little NIH icon, that means that this article is coming from one of the other National Institutes of Health. If this little camera, excuse me, that means that it's a video. So this is going to be a video from the American College of Radiology, and that video is available in both English and Spanish. And I also want to point out that there's this easy to read logo. If you ever see that, that means that that article has been written at a 3rd to 5th grade reading level, and it should be a fairly basic article. So those are often a helpful place to start. Just, when we're looking for health information, it's a good place to just start with some very basic information there. I want to go back. I will show you this page in Spanish as well, just so you can get a sense. So it looks very similar to the other page, but what has been removed is if there are articles, if there were things that were not available in Spanish, they've just been removed here. And I'm going back to English, and I want to go back to the Medline Plus homepage. And if you scroll down to the bottom of the homepage, there's a tab here called Health Information in Multiple Languages. So you can click on this tab, and you're able to search by language or by health topic. And this is going to, let me just, let's start by looking at a health topic. And I'm going to choose, okay, so at the top of the page, you're going to see this alphabetical listing. So you can, I want to look for COVID-19. So I'm going to go to the C and scroll down because I know it's here and see what's available in terms of information about COVID-19. So for this particular health topic, there are a lot of languages represented. So for arthritis, we only found 10 languages, but for arthritis, there are, for COVID-19, there are many. One thing to notice here is that sometimes you will find it's one document that is a bilingual document. In the case of this information, it's two separate documents. So we'll look at the English version. And I want to go back and look at this in Arabic. And it's the same document, it's just been translated. The words have been translated. And one thing that is recommended is if you are printing information in a language other than English for a patron, that you would print it in both English and the language that they've asked for. And the reason for that is that it's important for the patron to be able to bring that information back to their healthcare provider so that they can look at the information together and the health provider can see exactly what what message they're reading. Let's go back and look at languages. And I know French was mentioned as a language that might be relevant in Vermont. So there are lots of health articles that are available in French. And just to take a look at one so we can see. So before we looked at those resources from the CDC, which we'll also look at the CDC website in a minute, but that was two separate documents. This one on allergies is all on this. It's so you have the English on one side and French on the other, and it could be different for different health topics. This was created by Health Information Translations. And if we go down to the bottom, you can see that this information was updated October 26th of 2022, so it's quite recent. And I do want to show a couple more things about what's available on Medline Plus. So the medical encyclopedia, all of these tabs are going to have a Spanish version, but the medical encyclopedia is also available in both English and Spanish. You have the same opportunity to search by letter here. And I also want to point out, and the easiest way that I can find at this point to get there is going through the site map. But if you go to the site map, this has just broad health topics. If we scroll down, there's information, there are health videos, there are games, and there are health check tools. There are versions of these in English and Spanish, but I just want to show for videos. This is a list of videos that are available on Medline Plus in English, and they're also available in Spanish. So if you're looking for a video for a patron, you can find those there as well. Okay, so next I am going to take us over to the Office of Minority Health. Actually, has anything come in the chat, or are there any questions that have come up, Joy?
No, there are not.
Okay, just stop me if you have questions or if you want me to take a little longer, or yeah. So the Office of Minority Health, the mission is to improve the health of racial and ethnic minority populations through the development of health policies and programs that will help eliminate health disparities. Like Medline Plus, this website is available in Spanish as well. And I'm going to go back to the English version, but you can see that it's a similar layout. Everything is pretty much the same. If we go down to My Health, again, there's information on COVID in a variety of languages. You can also access from this orange banner here. But another thing I'd like to point out is there's an online library with, and this has a collection of more than 60,000 documents such as books, journal articles, and media related to health statuses of racial and ethnic minority populations. The library collection has resources in more than 40 languages. And we're going to just take a quick look here. And we can do a basic search, and I'm going to do arthritis again. And there are 319 records, but then I want to filter by language. And I just want to point out, so it is showing the languages that there are the most resources, so English, Spanish, and Chinese, but there are more. So if we click on that, and I just want to see what's available in Vietnamese. And here we find 5 different resources. These are a little older, 2016, but we'll just take a look. And I just want to be able to point out that here you can get the full text online. So here's a link to these different things. So that's a resource there. And I want to go back to the home page for the Office of Minority Health and just point out a few more things. There's also population profiles on this, and I'm just going to show Asian American Health Profile. So for this, this is a map of the US with the top 10 states that have the largest Asian American population according to the Census Bureau. There's information about demographics and other information that you might find helpful. And then there's information on health topics. And again, I'm going to go back. And the other thing I want to point out is this cultural competency section. There are really great resources here. To support culturally and linguistically appropriate services. Again, a lot of this is really related to health in general and health professionals. And there are training as well through Think Cultural Health that are related to health providers. But these are free training and continuing education courses that I think many people could find useful. They're really excellent. And if you do know healthcare providers, some of these are eligible for continuing education for specific health professions, and just to get a sense of some of the materials that are there. Under education, there's behavioral health, communication guide, disaster personnel, maternal health care, nurses, oral health providers, physicians, and promotorists. So there's a lot of really helpful resources there. And next, I'm going to hop over to the CDC. If I can figure out where I put that tab. Maybe I don't have one. Let's do it this way. So the Centers for Disease Control, again, there is a Spanish version, but I also want to point out at the top of the page for the CDC, there's this tab that says other languages. And if you open that, this is a curated list of resources that have been pulled together. And this is going to have information in languages other than English and Spanish here. And at the top, you'll see that there's a lot of information about COVID. There's some toolkits available and a lot of resources here. But if you scroll down, there's also just under 1,200 resources on various health topics in other languages. You'll notice that the top 2 here are in Ukrainian. But you can filter by language, and there's really a vast list of languages available. So there's at least some information in all of these different languages available on the CDC website that you can find. To take us back to the CDC homepage. And I know that there's a page on here related to immigrants. So I'm going to go to health topics, and I'm going to go to this immigrant, refugee, and migrant health page. And this is going to have a lot of different resources related to these populations. If we go to the About Immigrant, Refugee, and Migrant page, there's just some basic information. There are some definitions, some information about promoting health equity, a lot of resources here if you have time to just get lost in the internet. They're fun to look at and very informative. Going back, there are also health education and communication tools. So again, a lot of information related to COVID-19 and other languages. Also a COVID-19 booklet for refugees. There's also information about other infectious illnesses and information about natural disasters and severe weather. And if we continue, sorry for the scroll, but if we go down to the bottom, I just want to point out that there's also CDC has YouTube channels in both English and Spanish. So if that would be helpful, there are resources there as well. And the final thing I wanted to point out, sorry for the scroll, is back on this page, there are again refugee health profiles. So they've chosen 7 different groups here. And if we look at Bhutanese refugees, just to give an example, it's going to go over priority health conditions, background, and other information that you might find very interesting and useful. So there's group origins, where Bhutan and Nepal are located, information about language and literacy, religious beliefs, gender roles. There's just so much information here, and it's really quite interesting. A map for the state of primary resettlement of Bhutanese refugees, and Vermont is one of the states that is cited. So a lot of really interesting information. And the last national resource I wanted to share is called Ethnomed. Let me get to their homepage. So Ethnomed was developed for clinicians and healthcare providers working with immigrant and refugee populations in the greater Seattle area. However, the website provides information about immigration, cultural norms and values, experience with Western medicine, culture-specific information, and tools pertinent to the clinical encounter. So again, a lot of health-related information that's translated and culturally tailored information for patients, but it can really be used by anyone working with people from the cultures found in this drop-down menu. So these are the cultures that are represented here on this Ethnomed website. I also want to draw your attention to this section on immigration. There's some really nice resources here. The way that they break down their pages are for providers and for patients. So I typically go to the patient's side, and there's a lot of external resources that you might find helpful when working in your libraries. And in terms of finding specific health information, I do want to show that as well. So under clinical topics, these are the different topics where you might find information. I'm going to choose endocrine and diabetes. Again, this page is, there are a list of resources for providers and for patients. I'm going to choose patients. And you can filter by subtopic here on the right-hand side. You can filter by language if you know the language you're looking for, and you can filter by the type, so a video, PDF, or an audio file. And this is the main reason I'm showing you the Ethnomed site, is because they have these really wonderful audio files. So if we look at what is diabetes, this is a resource that was created by the Harborview Medical Center, and it was authored August 19th of 2020. But here they have PDFs of the information, but they've also created audio files in the languages, so that that can be a very helpful resource to have people be able to hear the information instead of having to read it off a page. So that is a great resource that I just wanted to make everyone aware of. And now I'm going to move over to some more Vermont specific resources. So I did want to draw your attention to the Department of Libraries, and Joy probably knows way more other cool things on here that I don't, but I did notice that under Services for Vermont Libraries, there is a tab for inclusive services. And then under this, there's a specific tab for new Americans. So if this is a topic that would be helpful to you, there's a ton of resources that have been curated here for your use. So I just want to draw your attention that these are all here. Um, Also, as I mentioned before, the Vermont Department of Health, hopefully this is, nope, that's public safety. To find my way back to the Department of Health. Sorry. So from the main page, which I'm not on, let's see. So I will find my way back to the main page of the Vermont Department of Health, but for now I'm going to show you that if you go to news and information resources, there's a specific page on translations. Actually, here, okay, here's our homepage, sorry. So this is your Vermont Department of Health. You can go down and choose news and information resources and then translations. And here there's this really nice curated list of resources. There are specific resources available about COVID-19. I'm going to start here with posters, flyers, and fact sheets. There are a ton of resources here about being tick smart, disaster preparedness, recipes, environmental health issues, all kinds of really cool things, and a variety of languages here on the Vermont Department of Health. And going back, there are videos in multiple languages, but also under this COVID-19 translations. There are a lot of resources here in different languages on the different uh, home tests and other information that might be useful. But I also want to point out that there's this whole group of videos that have been created. And, oh, sorry. I think this is where I want to go. No, it's not. Anyway, there is a huge list of curated videos, and these are created by this this group, the Vermont Department of, the Vermont Language Justice Project, and they have done some really great and interesting projects. I really don't know anything about the group, but they've created how-to videos for the rapid antigen tests in 15 languages for 6 different tests. They've also created a video on like what to do when you're picking up a prescription at the pharmacy and what to expect. And there's some really interesting videos that they've created. So I just thought those were interesting. Again, I don't know a lot about that resource, but I thought it was really interesting. I guess, sorry, here is that list of videos that for the Vermont Language Justice Project. And the last thing I wanted to point out is the Vermont Department of Public Safety has these cards called I Speak cards. And I think these are very helpful. So this is the document here. And the reason that these are helpful is because anyone who's receiving healthcare, if they go to a clinic that receives federal funds, then they are entitled to language translation services. So if a person needs translation from their medical provider, they have the right to that. So these are cards in each language, and this says you have the right to get language help at no cost. You can request written materials in your language. And then there's also this card that says, hello, I speak Arabic. So this could be really helpful to patrons to have a way of showing people who do not speak Arabic the language that they need help in. So those are the resources that I wanted to make sure that I shared with you today. And I'm going to stop sharing. And I'll turn my camera back on. And I guess I have not left very much time for questions, but if anyone has any questions or comments, I would love to hear from you. And that concludes my presentation, so thank you.
I haven't had time to digest enough to like have questions, but thank you. This is such a really helpful bunch of resources. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for attending. And I do want everyone to know, like, the network is here for everyone, and we'd love to hear from you. And we have 4 coordinators, so please reach out with questions or, yeah, anytime.
I do have an evaluation for the workshop, which was excellent. So I'm putting that in the chat. It would be helpful if people could fill that out. Thank you so much, Benny. I loved that you highlighted things from NNLM and also Vermont specific things. So some of the things you talked about, I put links to in the chat, and then
Oh, thank you.
I will post, you'll send me your slides right now. I'll post those
Yes.
with the recording. So the recording for this will be on our website and also on Niche Academy. So sorry, there's a snowplow going by my house right now. So a little local color there. That's what that sound is in the background. We have a couple more minutes if anybody has any questions, comments. Myrna added the Vermont Department of Labor also has safety information in Spanish. Yeah, thank you. That's
Thank
good
you.
to know. I am going to stop the recording, but we do have a couple minutes we can stay on if anyone has any more questions for Benny about NNLM or this specific topic.